The morning sun had barely touched the mountains of Fort Bragg when Sarah Mitchell stepped off the bus with her single duffel bag. She was 23 years old, stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, and weighed 130 pounds. Her brown hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her green eyes scanned the training compound with a mixture of determination and nervousness. Around her, 47 men also stepped off various buses. They were all here for the same reason: the Advanced Sniper Qualification Course. It was considered one of the most difficult training programs in the entire United States military. The dropout rate was over 60%, and in the 62-year history of this particular course, no woman had ever completed it. Sarah was about to try to change that. A drill sergeant with a shaved head and a neck as thick as a tree trunk approached the group. His name tag read Morrison, and his eyes swept across the candidates like a farmer examining livestock at an auction. When his gaze landed on Sarah, it stopped. His expression shifted from professional neutrality to something between confusion and annoyance. "You lost, soldier?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying across the gravel yard. Sarah stood at attention. "No, Sergeant. I'm here for the sniper qualification course." A few chuckles rippled through the group of men. Morrison did not laugh. He walked closer to Sarah, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "This ain't the place for social experiments," he said quietly. "The people who come here carry 90 pounds of gear through mountains. They crawl through mud for 16 hours. They shoot targets at distances most people can't even see. You understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes, Sergeant," Sarah replied. "I understand completely." Morrison stared at her for a long moment. Then he shrugged and stepped back. "Your funeral," he muttered, and walked away to address the entire group. Sarah had expected this. She had prepared for it. What she had not prepared for was just how relentless it would become. The first week was called Hell Week for a reason. Every morning began at 4 a.m. with a 5-mile run carrying a 40-pound rucksack. This was followed by 2 hours of physical training that included push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, and exercises that Sarah had never even heard of before. Breakfast was 15 minutes long. Then came the classroom sessions on ballistics, wind calculation, target identification, and camouflage techniques. Lunch was another 15 minutes. The afternoon was spent on the shooting range or in the field, practicing everything from basic marksmanship to building concealed positions in various terrains. By the end of each day, Sarah's muscles screamed in pain. Her hands were blistered from carrying weapons and equipment. Her feet were covered in sores that she had to treat carefully each night to prevent infection. And through all of this, she had to endure the constant commentary from her fellow candidates. "Hey, sweetheart, need me to carry that for you?" one man called out during a march. "Maybe she's here to cook for us," another joked during lunch. $50 says she's gone by Friday, a third wagered openly. Sarah ignored them all. She had learned long ago that words only had power if you gave them power. So she focused on her training, on her technique, on becoming better with each passing hour. Her journey to this moment had begun 12 years earlier in a small town in rural Wyoming. Her father, Thomas Mitchell, had been a hunting guide and a former Marine. Her mother had died when Sarah was 8 years old, leaving Thomas to raise 3 children alone. Sarah was the youngest and the only girl. Thomas Mitchell believed that all his children should know how to shoot. It was practical knowledge in Wyoming, where wildlife could be dangerous, and the nearest police station was 40 miles away. So he taught all 3 of his kids the basics of rifle handling, and then he taught them the advanced techniques that he had learned during his time as a Marine Scout sniper. Sarah took to shooting like a fish takes to water. By the time she was 12, she could outshoot both of her older brothers. By 15, she had won 3 state-level shooting competitions. By 18, she held 2 national records in long-distance precision shooting. But when she told her father that she wanted to join the military and become a sniper, he had grown quiet. "It's a hard path for anyone," he said finally. and it'll be 10 times harder for you because you're a woman. Not because you can't do it, because other people will think you can't. Sarah had nodded. I know, Dad, but I still want to try. Thomas Mitchell had looked at his daughter for a long time. Then he smiled, just a little. You always were the stubborn one, he said, just like your mother. Sarah had enlisted in the Army at 18, completed basic training, and then spent 4 years working her way up through the ranks. She served as an infantry soldier, then as a designated marksman in her unit. She deployed twice to Afghanistan, where she earned a Bronze Star for her actions during an ambush in Helmand Province. When the military finally opened combat roles to women in 2016, Sarah immediately applied for the sniper qualification course. She was rejected 3 times before she was finally accepted. Now she was here, in the crucible, being tested every single day. The shooting portion of the training began in the 2nd week. This was where Sarah expected to shine. She had spent her entire life behind a rifle, and she knew her capabilities. The first exercise was simple: 10 shots at a stationary target from 500 meters. A qualified sniper was expected to hit the target at least 9 times out of 10. Sarah hit it 10 times. All 10 shots were within a 2-inch grouping. Sergeant Morrison examined the target with a magnifying glass. He looked at Sarah, then back at the target, then at Sarah again. Not bad, he said finally. It was the first time he had said anything remotely positive to her. The other candidates noticed too. The jokes became less frequent after that. Not because they respected her, Sarah knew, but because she had given them a reason to pay attention. But shooting at a range was only a small part of being a sniper. The real challenge was everything else. The stalking exercises, where candidates had to move across open ground without being detected. The observation tests, where they had to identify objects from extreme distances using only their scopes. The endurance marches, where they carried everything they needed on their backs across miles of rough terrain. In the stalking exercises, Sarah struggled at first. She was smaller than the men, which should have been an advantage, but she found that the techniques she had learned were designed for larger bodies. She had to adapt, to find new ways of moving that worked for her frame. It took her 3 failed attempts before she finally completed a stalk successfully. In the observation tests, she excelled. Her patience was extraordinary. While other candidates grew restless after hours of staring through a scope, Sarah could maintain focus for an entire day. She spotted targets that others missed. She calculated distances with remarkable accuracy. The endurance marches were brutal for everyone, but they were especially difficult for Sarah. The standard equipment load was designed for a larger body, and carrying 90 pounds when you only weighed 130 was a different challenge than carrying 90 pounds when you weighed 200. Sarah's back ached constantly. Her shoulders developed permanent grooves from the straps of her rucksack, but she kept moving 1 step at a time, refusing to quit. By the end of the 3rd week, the class had shrunk from 48 to 31. 17 candidates had dropped out or been eliminated. Sarah was still there. The remaining candidates began to look at her differently, not with respect exactly, but with curiosity. How was she still here? How had she survived what had broken so many men? One evening, as Sarah sat cleaning her rifle in the barracks, a candidate named Jackson approached her. He was a big man from Texas, with a thick accent and hands that looked like they could crush rocks. "Hey," he said, sitting down across from her. Sarah looked up but did not stop cleaning her weapon. "Hey, listen, I owe you an apology," Jackson said. "I was one of the ones making jokes when you first got here. That wasn't right." Sarah shrugged. "I've heard worse." "Still wasn't right," Jackson insisted. "I've been watching you these past few weeks. You're good, really good. Better than a lot of guys here, including me." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Thanks. I'm not saying it to be nice," Jackson continued. I'm saying it because it's true. And I figure if we're going to be working together, I might as well be honest. That night, for the first time since arriving, Sarah felt like she might actually belong. But the real test was still coming. Week 4 brought the mountain training exercise, a 72-hour ordeal that took place in the rugged terrain of the Appalachian Mountains. Candidates would be dropped off in remote locations with minimal supplies and expected to navigate their way to a series of checkpoints while avoiding detection from instructors who would be actively searching for them. The morning of the exercise, Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Her rifle, a modified M24 that she had grown to love, was in perfect condition. Her pack contained 3 days' worth of food, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, and the essentials for survival. She had mapped her route mentally, identifying the best terrain for concealment and the most efficient paths between checkpoints. "Remember," Sergeant Morrison announced to the group, "this is as close to real combat as you'll get in training. Out there being spotted means you're dead. Act accordingly." The candidates were transported by helicopter to their starting positions, scattered across 20 miles of wilderness. Sarah was dropped on a ridgeline overlooking a valley. As the helicopter flew away, she took a moment to survey her surroundings. The forest was dense, a mixture of pine and hardwood that provided excellent concealment. The terrain was steep and unforgiving, with rocky outcrops and thick underbrush that would make movement difficult. The weather forecast predicted rain for the second day, which would both help and hinder her progress. Sarah began moving immediately, using the techniques she had practiced until they became instinct. She stayed below ridgelines to avoid silhouetting herself against the sky. She moved slowly through areas with poor concealment, timing her movements to coincide with natural sounds like wind gusts or bird calls. She chose her path carefully, avoiding game trails where instructors would likely set up observation posts. The first checkpoint was 8 miles away at the base of a cliff that overlooked a small stream. Sarah reached it in 16 hours, arriving just before dawn. She found the marker, recorded her time, and immediately began moving toward the second checkpoint. The second day brought rain as predicted. The water made everything more difficult. The rocks became slippery, the underbrush became heavier, and maintaining warmth became a constant battle. But it also reduced visibility, which allowed Sarah to move more quickly through exposed areas. She reached the second checkpoint by midday, ahead of schedule. But as she approached the third checkpoint, something changed. She heard voices, instructors. They were close, maybe 200 meters ahead, directly between her and the checkpoint. Sarah froze, melting into the undergrowth like a shadow. For 3 hours, she lay motionless in a drainage ditch, covered in mud and leaves, as instructors swept the area around her. At one point, an instructor walked within 10 feet of her position. She could hear his boots crunching on the leaves, could see his shadow passing overhead. She controlled her breathing, slowing it to almost nothing, becoming just another part of the forest floor. Finally, the instructors moved on. Sarah waited another 30 minutes to be certain, then continued her approach. She reached the third checkpoint as darkness fell on the second night. Only 2 checkpoints remained. The final day was the most demanding. The terrain grew steeper, the vegetation thinner. Concealment became harder. Sarah had to rely on shadows and terrain features more than plants and trees. Her muscles burned from 2 days of constant movement. Her mind was foggy from lack of sleep, but she kept pushing. The fourth checkpoint was located on a knife-edge ridge with almost no natural cover. Sarah waited for a cloud to pass over the sun, reducing the light, then sprinted across the open ground in a low crouch. She was exposed for maybe 10 seconds. It was the most vulnerable she had felt during the entire exercise, but no shouts came. No one had seen her. The final checkpoint was at the extraction point, a clearing at the bottom of a valley. Sarah reached it at 1400 hours on the third day, 6 hours ahead of the deadline. She was one of only 12 candidates to complete the exercise without being detected. Sergeant Morrison was waiting at the extraction point. As Sarah emerged from the tree line, exhausted but triumphant, he gave her a small nod. "You made it," he said. "Yes, Sergeant," Sarah replied. Morrison looked at her for a long moment. "You know, when you first got here, I thought you'd be gone in 3 days. Thought this whole thing was a political stunt. I was wrong about that." Sarah did not know what to say, so she said nothing. "You still got a long way to go," Morrison continued. "Final qualifications are next week. That's where most people fail. But you got a chance, Mitchell. A real chance." It was the closest thing to praise Sarah had ever heard from the man. That night, back at the barracks, Sarah allowed herself to feel hope for the first time. She was still standing, she was still fighting, and the end was finally in sight. But she could not know what was coming. She could not know that in 7 days she would face a test unlike any she had faced before. She could not know that a 3-star general would be watching. She could not know that the eyes of the entire military would be on her, waiting to see if she would prove the doubters right or shatter their expectations forever. All she knew was that she had come too far to stop now. And stopping was never something Sarah Mitchell had been good at. The morning sun rose over Fort Bragg, and Sarah Mitchell rose with it, ready to face whatever came next. The final week of qualification began with an announcement that sent whispers through the remaining candidates. Lieutenant General Harold Prescott, the commanding general of the United States Army Special Operations Command, would be visiting Fort Bragg on the final day of qualifications. He would personally observe the graduation exercises and present certificates to those who completed the course. This was unusual. Generals rarely attended these events. Something bigger was happening, and Sarah could feel the tension among the instructors. Sergeant Morrison gathered the 12 remaining candidates in the briefing room. His face was even more serious than usual. "Listen up," he said. "You've all made it this far, which means you're the best of what we started with. But final qualifications are designed to test you beyond what you think you're capable of. Over the next 6 days, you will face scenarios that simulate real combat conditions. You will make decisions that would have life or death consequences in the field. And on the 7th day, you will demonstrate your skills in front of General Prescott himself." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "This isn't just about shooting anymore. This is about proving that you have what it takes to be trusted with the responsibility of a sniper. The power to take a life from a distance, without warning, without chance for surrender. That power requires judgment, discipline, and integrity. We're going to find out if you have those things." The first scenario began that afternoon. Candidates were presented with a complex urban environment, a mock village constructed on the training grounds with buildings, streets, and even actors playing civilians. The mission was simple in description, impossible in execution. Identify and neutralize a high-value target without causing civilian casualties. Sarah was given a file on her target. A man named Victor Petrov, former military, now working as a weapons dealer. He would be somewhere in the village, but his exact location was unknown. He was known to use human shields. He changed position frequently, and there were over 50 civilians in the village going about their daily activities. Sarah entered the scenario with her rifle and her wits. She climbed to the 2nd floor of a building on the edge of the village, establishing a position that gave her visibility over about 60% of the main square. Then she waited. For 6 hours, she watched. She identified patterns. She noticed which people moved with purpose and which wandered aimlessly. She spotted lookouts on rooftops, men who watched the approaches to the village a little too carefully. She mapped their positions in her mind. At the 4-hour mark, she spotted Petrov. He emerged from a building on the far side of the square, surrounded by 3 bodyguards. He was heading toward a vehicle. Sarah had maybe 30 seconds before he would be gone. She calculated the distance. 740 meters. Wind was light from the east. Temperature was moderate, no significant adjustment needed. She controlled her breathing, finding that perfect stillness between heartbeats. But then something happened. A child ran into the square, chasing a ball. The child ran directly toward Petrov's group. One of the bodyguards grabbed the child, pulling her close. Human shield. Sarah's finger rested on the trigger, but she did not fire. The shot was there. She could make it. But the margin for error was less than an inch, and if she missed, if the wind shifted at the wrong moment, a child would die. She let Petrov go. The evaluators later told her that she had made the correct decision. The scenario was designed to test judgment as much as skill. Many candidates under pressure would have taken the shot. Some would have hit the target, some would have killed the child. The correct answer was to wait for a better opportunity. "You showed restraint," Sergeant Morrison told her afterward. "That's harder than pulling the trigger." The second scenario, on day 2, was a reconnaissance mission. Sarah was inserted into a forested area and given 48 hours to locate and document a simulated enemy camp. She could not be detected. She could not engage. She could only observe and report. This was the kind of mission where patience was everything. Sarah found a position overlooking the camp and settled in. She did not move for 16 hours straight, watching through her scope as enemy soldiers went about their routines. She counted personnel. She mapped the layout of the camp. She identified leaders by observing who gave orders and who followed them. At one point, an enemy patrol passed within 20 meters of her position. She had camouflaged herself using local vegetation, becoming part of the forest floor. The patrol walked right past her without a glance. When she extracted after 48 hours, her report was so detailed that the evaluators initially suspected she had somehow obtained advance information about the camp. She had not. She had simply watched and remembered and recorded everything with the precision of a machine. The third scenario was the most physically demanding. A 20-mile movement through hostile territory, carrying full equipment, followed immediately by a shooting qualification at the end. The purpose was to test whether candidates could still perform under extreme fatigue. Sarah's legs burned from the first mile. By mile 10, she was running on pure willpower. By mile 15, she was questioning every decision that had led her to this moment. But she did not stop. She could not stop. When she reached the shooting range, her hands were shaking from exhaustion. The targets were set at various distances, from 300 to 1,200 meters. She had to hit at least 80% to pass. Sarah took a deep breath. She remembered her father's voice, teaching her on those cold Wyoming mornings. "The rifle doesn't know if you're tired," he used to say. "Only you know. So don't tell the rifle." She raised her weapon and fired. The first shot hit center mass, the second, the third. She moved through the course methodically, pushing exhaustion out of her mind, focusing only on the fundamentals: breathing, trigger control, follow-through. When she finished, she had hit 92% of her targets. It was the highest score of the day. Jackson, who had finished the course just before her, watched with undisguised admiration. "How do you do that?" he asked. "I could barely see straight after that march." Sarah shrugged. "Practice. Lots and lots of practice." The fourth day brought a team exercise. Candidates were paired up and given a mission that required coordination between a shooter and a spotter. Sarah was paired with a candidate named Reynolds, a quiet man from Oregon who had barely spoken 10 words to her during the entire course. Reynolds was assigned as the shooter. Sarah was the spotter. This meant she would be responsible for identifying targets, calculating adjustments for wind and distance, and directing Reynolds' fire. It was a position that required trust, since the shooter had to rely completely on the spotter's calculations. Reynolds looked uncomfortable with the arrangement. "No offense," he said, "but I usually work alone." "So do I," Sarah replied. "But today we work together. You want to pass or not?" They set up their position overlooking a valley. Multiple targets would appear at random intervals and random locations. They had to identify and engage each one within a 30-second window. The first target appeared at 900 meters. Sarah made her calculations. 900 meters, wind half value from the right. Hold 1 minute right, fire on ready. Reynolds hesitated for a split second, then fired. The target dropped. Hit, Sarah confirmed. Target 2, 11 o'clock, distance 1200, full value wind, hold 2 minutes right, elevation plus 4 clicks. Reynolds adjusted and fired. Another hit. They worked through the exercise with growing synchronization. By the end, they had hit 14 of 15 targets, the second highest score in the class. Only one team had done better, and they had missed the same target that Sarah and Reynolds missed, a moving target at extreme range that appeared for only 15 seconds. Afterward, Reynolds sought Sarah out. "I misjudged you," he said simply. "Your calculations were perfect, better than any spotter I've worked with." Sarah nodded. "We made a good team." "Yeah," Reynolds agreed. "We did." Day 5 was dedicated to written examinations and oral reviews. Candidates had to demonstrate their theoretical knowledge of ballistics, meteorology, camouflage, and tactics. They were questioned by a panel of instructors, challenged on their decisions during the previous scenarios, forced to defend their choices under intense scrutiny. Sarah sat before the panel, facing questions that ranged from technical to philosophical. "Private Mitchell, in Scenario 1, you chose not to take a shot that had approximately an 80% chance of success. Why?" "Because an 80% chance of success meant a 20% chance of killing an innocent child," Sarah replied. "That's not acceptable." "What if that child were the only thing standing between success and the target escaping to kill dozens more people?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. "Then I would look for another solution. There's almost always another way. And if there truly isn't, if it really comes down to one innocent life versus many, that's a decision that should be made above my pay grade. My job is to take the shots I'm given, not to decide who lives and dies based on mathematics." The panel members exchanged glances. One of them, an older major with silver hair, actually smiled. Day 6 was supposed to be a rest day, a chance for candidates to recover before the final evaluation. But rest was impossible. The weight of what was coming pressed down on everyone. Sarah spent the day checking and rechecking her equipment. She cleaned her rifle 3 times, even though it was already spotless. She reviewed her notes on wind calculation and range estimation. She ran through scenarios in her mind, preparing for anything. That evening, Sergeant Morrison called her aside. "Tomorrow's going to be different," he said quietly, so the other candidates could not hear. "General Prescott isn't just here to watch. He's here to evaluate whether the sniper program should continue accepting female candidates. There are people above him who want to close that door. They think your presence here is a mistake." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "So this is political." "Everything's political," Morrison replied. "But that doesn't make it less important. You've earned your place here, Mitchell. You've outperformed half the men in this class. Tomorrow you need to prove that to people who don't want to believe it. What happens if I fail?" Morrison's expression hardened. "You won't fail. You're one of the best candidates I've trained in 15 years. Man or woman doesn't matter. You're good. Tomorrow you show them exactly how good." That night, Sarah did not sleep. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. Her father's lessons, her years of practice, her deployments overseas, all of it had been leading here. She thought about the people who had doubted her, the recruiters who had rejected her applications, the fellow soldiers who had laughed at her ambitions, the instructors who had expected her to quit. She thought about the women who would come after her. If she succeeded, doors would open. If she failed, those doors might close forever. The pressure was enormous, But pressure, Sarah reminded herself, was just another variable, like wind, like temperature, like distance. It could be measured, accounted for, and overcome. Morning came slowly, the sky lightening by degrees, until the sun finally broke over the horizon. Sarah rose, dressed in her cleanest uniform, and made her way to the qualification range. The range had been transformed overnight. Bleachers had been erected for observers. Flags flew from poles. A podium stood at one end, decorated with the insignias of various military units. This was no longer just a training exercise. It was a spectacle. General Harold Prescott arrived in a convoy of black SUVs. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with gray hair cut short in military fashion. His uniform bore 3 stars and enough ribbons to fill a small museum. His face was stern, the face of a man who had seen combat and commanded thousands. He shook hands with the instructors and took his seat in the center of the bleachers. Beside him sat a colonel with a notepad, clearly recording everything. Sergeant Morrison assembled the 12 remaining candidates. "Today, you will complete the final qualification course," he announced. "You will engage targets at distances from 400 to 1,800 meters. You will shoot from various positions, including standing, kneeling, and prone. You will shoot under time pressure. And you will do all of this while being observed by the commanding general." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the candidates. "This is what you've been training for. Everything else was preparation. This is the test. Give it everything you have." The qualification course was conducted one candidate at a time. Each candidate had 45 minutes to complete a series of shooting challenges, with scores recorded for accuracy, speed, and technique. Sarah was scheduled 8th. She watched as the candidates before her took their turns. Some performed well, others crumbled under the pressure, missing shots they would normally make easily. The weight of observation, of being judged, was too much for them. Jackson performed admirably, scoring in the top quartile. Reynolds struggled with the time pressure but still passed. Others were not so fortunate. Then it was Sarah's turn. She walked to the shooting position, acutely aware of every eye on her. General Prescott was watching. The instructors were watching. The other candidates were watching. Even the range safety officers seemed more attentive than usual. Sarah took her position and raised her rifle. The first target appeared. 400 meters. A simple shot. She breathed out slowly and fired. Hit. The second target. 600 meters. Slight wind from the left. Adjust. Fire. Hit. She moved through the course methodically, letting muscle memory take over. Shot after shot. Target after target. The world narrowed to the space between her eye and the scope, between her finger and the trigger. 800 meters. Hit. 1,000 meters. Hit. 1,200 meters. The wind picked up slightly. She adjusted her aim by 2 clicks right. Hit. The crowd had grown quiet. The murmuring that had accompanied earlier candidates had stopped. Everyone was watching now, truly watching. 1,400 meters. Sarah steadied her breathing. At this distance, even tiny movements could throw off the shot by feet. She found the stillness between heartbeats. Hit. 1,600 meters. The target was barely visible, a tiny dot in the distance. Sarah calculated the bullet drop, the wind drift, the rotation of the earth. She made her adjustments. Hit. The final target was at 1,800 meters, over a mile away. It was an almost impossible shot, included in the qualification more as a test of capability than an expectation of success. Many qualified snipers could not reliably hit targets at this distance. Sarah looked through her scope. The target was so small it seemed like a speck. The wind was variable, gusting unpredictably. The sun was creating heat mirages that distorted the air between her and the target. She had 30 seconds. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. She thought about her father standing beside her on those Wyoming mornings. She thought about every shot she had ever taken, every lesson she had ever learned. She opened her eyes, made her final calculations, and placed her finger on the trigger. The world went silent. She squeezed. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The bullet flew, a tiny projectile crossing an impossible distance, fighting against wind and gravity and time. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then the target shattered. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone started clapping. Then more people joined in, until the applause became a wave of sound. Sarah lowered her rifle and stood. Her score was being calculated, but she already knew. She had not missed a single target. A perfect score. The first perfect score in over 5 years. She turned to face the bleachers. General Prescott was standing, his expression unreadable. He raised his hand, and the applause slowly died away. The moment of truth had arrived. General Harold Prescott descended from the bleachers with measured steps. His polished boots crunched against the gravel as he made his way toward the shooting position where Sarah still stood, her rifle cradled in her arms. The entire range had fallen silent, every observer holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The general stopped 3 feet in front of Sarah. His eyes, gray and sharp as steel, examined her with an intensity that made her feel like she was being disassembled and analyzed piece by piece. "Private Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet. "That was the 1,800-meter target." "Yes, sir." "In 17 years of observing these qualifications, I have seen exactly 4 candidates hit that target. 3 of them went on to become some of the finest snipers in the history of this military." He paused. "You are the 5th. Sarah remained at attention, uncertain how to respond. General Prescott turned to face the bleachers, to the assembled instructors, officers, and observers who had come to watch the qualification. "I want everyone here to understand something," he said, his voice rising. "I came here today with certain expectations. I had been told by various people that opening the sniper program to women was a mistake, that physical differences would make them inadequate, that emotional factors would compromise their judgment, that allowing them to compete would lower the standards of the program." He turned back to Sarah. "Private Mitchell has just achieved the first perfect score in 5 years. She completed every scenario in this training course with distinction. She demonstrated judgment, discipline, and skill that would be exceptional in any candidate, regardless of gender." The general reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, metallic. It was a pin, the crossed rifle's insignia of a qualified sniper. "I am not in the habit of making speeches," Prescott continued. "I am a soldier, not a politician. But today I want to make something very clear. This program has never been about gender. It has never been about proving points or making statements. It has been about finding the best people to serve in one of the most demanding roles in our military." He held up the pin so everyone could see it. "Private Mitchell is one of the best, not one of the best women. One of the best. Period." General Prescott stepped forward and personally pinned the insignia onto Sarah's uniform. It was an unprecedented honor. Usually, the instructors handled such things. For a 3-star general to do it himself was something none of the observers had ever seen. "Congratulations, Sniper," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You've earned this. Now go make us proud." Sarah felt tears threatening to form, but she held them back through sheer force of will. "Thank you, sir. I will." The general stepped back and saluted. Sarah returned the salute, her arm as steady as it had been when she took that final shot. Then the crowd erupted. The applause that had started earlier returned with twice the intensity. The other candidates rushed forward to congratulate her. Jackson was grinning so wide it looked like his face might split. Reynolds gave her a simple nod of respect that meant more than any words could have. Even Sergeant Morrison, that hard-faced man who had doubted her from the first day, extended his hand. "Well done, Mitchell," he said as they shook. "You proved me wrong. I'm glad you did." The graduation ceremony that followed was a blur of handshakes, photographs, and formal congratulations. 9 of the 12 candidates had passed the qualification. Sarah was the only woman among them, but for the first time since arriving at Fort Bragg, that fact felt irrelevant. What mattered was that she had earned her place. The celebration continued into the evening. The successful candidates gathered in a local restaurant, swapping stories from the training, laughing at shared memories that had seemed unbearable at the time, but now felt like badges of honor. Sarah found herself surrounded by men who had once dismissed her, now treating her as an equal. It was a strange feeling, validation mixed with something like sadness. These same men, good men who had worked beside her and supported her in the end, had started from a position of doubt. How many women never got the chance to prove themselves because that doubt was never overcome? But tonight was not the night for such heavy thoughts. Tonight was for celebration. Around midnight, Sarah stepped outside the restaurant for some fresh air. The Wyoming girl in her still felt uncomfortable in crowds, still needed space and quiet to think. She pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hello?" Her father's voice, rough from sleep. "Dad, it's me." "Sarah?" The grogginess vanished immediately. "What time is it? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Dad. Better than fine." She paused, feeling the weight of the moment. "I passed. I'm a qualified sniper now." Silence on the other end. Then a sound that Sarah had only heard a handful of times in her life, her father crying. "Dad?" "I'm here," Thomas Mitchell managed. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Your mother would be so proud." Sarah felt her own tears finally break free. She let them fall, standing alone under the stars, connected by phone to the man who had made all of this possible. "Thanks, Dad, for everything." "You did this yourself, Sarah. I just gave you a push." They talked for an hour, father and daughter, until Thomas's voice grew heavy with exhaustion. Sarah promised to call again soon, then hung up and returned inside. The party continued until nearly dawn. 3 weeks later, Sarah received her first assignment. She was being deployed to a classified location in the Middle East, attached to a special operations unit conducting high-value target missions. The work would be dangerous, demanding, and exactly what she had trained for. She shipped out on a gray October morning, boarding a transport plane with her rifle case and her duffel bag. As the plane lifted off, she watched Fort Bragg shrink beneath her, the place that had tested her, broken her, and ultimately forged her into something stronger. Her first mission came 2 months later. A terrorist cell had taken over a small village in a mountainous region, using civilians as shields while they planned attacks on coalition forces. The unit was tasked with eliminating the cell's leadership. Sarah set up her position on a ridge overlooking the village, 2,000 meters away. It was further than even her qualification shot, but the terrain required distance for safety. For 3 days, she watched. She identified the leaders by their movements, their body language, their interactions with others. She mapped their routines, noted their patterns, learned their habits. On the 4th day, an opportunity presented itself. The primary target emerged from a building, walking toward a vehicle. He was alone. No civilians nearby. No bodyguards blocking the shot. Sarah made her calculations. 2,000 meters. Wind from the east. Variable. Temperature cold. Affecting bullet trajectory. She adjusted her scope, controlled her breathing, found that perfect stillness. She fired. The bullet traveled for over 3 seconds, crossing valleys and ridges, fighting against every force that tried to knock it off course. It found its target. The mission was a success. Coalition forces moved in and secured the village without civilian casualties. The terrorist cell collapsed without its leadership. Dozens of planned attacks were prevented. Sarah received no public recognition. Sniper operations were classified. But she received something better. A personal commendation from the commanding officer, written on official letterhead and signed by hand. "Your actions directly saved countless lives," the letter read. "You represent the finest traditions of our military. Well done, Sniper." Over the next 2 years, Sarah completed 17 deployments. She became known within the special operations community as one of the most reliable snipers in the field. Other units requested her specifically. She turned down offers to transfer to training positions, preferring to stay operational. Her longest confirmed shot came during a mission in Afghanistan at 2,300 meters. It was not the longest shot in military history, but it was remarkable by any standard. The target was a bomb maker responsible for dozens of coalition casualties. He never knew what hit him. Her most difficult shot came during a hostage rescue, when she had to thread a bullet through a 4-inch window to neutralize a captor without hitting the hostage he was holding. She made the shot. The hostage survived, but the mission that would define her career came 3 years after her graduation from sniper school. A team of special operators had been pinned down in an abandoned factory in an unnamed city. They had been ambushed during a raid, cut off from extraction, with enemy fighters closing in from multiple directions. Air support was unavailable due to weather. Ground reinforcement was 2 hours away. Sarah was positioned a kilometer away on the roof of a building overlooking the factory. She had been there as overwatch for the mission, watching through her scope as the situation deteriorated. For 4 hours, she held that position. Every time an enemy fighter exposed themselves, she dropped them. Shot after shot, target after target, she kept the attacking force at bay. Her barrel grew hot from firing, her muscles cramped from holding position. But she did not move. She could not move. The team commander later reported that Sarah engaged over 60 targets during those 4 hours, 43 confirmed eliminations. The rest were driven back or wounded enough to remove them from the fight. When reinforcements finally arrived and extracted the team, 5 of the 8 operators were wounded but alive. Without Sarah's intervention, the commander said, none of them would have survived. For her actions that day, Sarah received the Silver Star. The citation praised her extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry in action against an armed enemy. It was presented by the same General Prescott, who had pinned her sniper qualification, now wearing a 4th star. "I told you to make us proud," Prescott said as he placed the medal around her neck. "You exceeded every expectation." The ceremony was private, classified, attended only by those with sufficient clearance, but word spread through the military nonetheless. The story of the woman who held off an army with a rifle became legend, told in hushed tones among special operators and snipers. After 10 years of active service, Sarah finally accepted a training position. Her body had accumulated too many injuries, too many hours in uncomfortable positions, too many miles carrying heavy loads. She could still shoot with deadly accuracy, but the operational tempo was no longer sustainable. She returned to Fort Bragg as an instructor in the same sniper qualification course that had once tested her. The irony was not lost on her. On her first day as an instructor, she addressed a new class of candidates. 43 men and 6 women stood at attention, waiting for her to speak. "Let me tell you something about this course," she began. "It will break you. It will make you question every decision you've ever made. It will push you beyond what you think you can handle." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the candidates, lingering briefly on the women. "But here's the secret. The people who succeed aren't the strongest, or the fastest, or even the best shots. They're the ones who refuse to quit. They're the ones who get knocked down and stand back up. They're the ones who understand that this isn't about proving yourself to anyone else. It's about proving yourself to yourself." She walked down the line, examining each candidate in turn. Some of you are looking at me and thinking that I had it easy because I'm a woman, that I got special treatment, that standards were lowered for me. She stopped in front of a young man who quickly looked away. You're wrong. Ask the men who trained with me. Ask the instructors who pushed me harder than anyone else in my class because they were trying to make me quit. Ask the enemy fighters who underestimated me right up until the moment they stopped breathing. Her voice hardened. In this course, there is no easy. There is no special treatment. There is only the work. You either do it or you don't. You either have what it takes or you don't. And by the time you're finished, you'll know the truth about yourself one way or another. She returned to the front of the group. Welcome to Sniper School. Your journey starts now. Over the next decade, Sarah trained hundreds of new snipers. She pushed them harder than they thought possible, just as she had been pushed. She demanded excellence, accepted no excuses, and transformed raw recruits into some of the finest precision shooters in the world. Among them were 23 women. Not all of them graduated. Not all of them had what it took. But those who did went on to serve with distinction, following the path that Sarah had carved through rock and resistance. At the age of 48, Sarah Mitchell retired from military service. Her final ceremony was attended by generals and privates alike, by men she had trained and women she had inspired, by families of soldiers whose lives she had saved from 1,000 meters away. General Prescott, now retired himself, gave the keynote speech. When Sarah Mitchell arrived at Fort Bragg 25 years ago, he said, she was told that women weren't meant to be snipers. Today, we know differently. Not because of policy changes or political decisions, but because of her. Because she proved, shot by shot, mission by mission, that excellence has no gender. He turned to face Sarah directly. You didn't just meet the standard, Sarah. You set a new one. And the military is better because of it. Sarah stepped forward to address the crowd one final time. She was older now, gray threading through her brown hair, lines mapping the years on her face. But her green eyes were as sharp as ever. 25 years ago, she said, I shattered a target in front of a general who wasn't sure if women belonged in his program. Today, I look out at this crowd and I see women wearing the crossed rifles insignia that I once thought I would never earn. She smiled, a rare expression for her. That target wasn't just wood and paper. It was every assumption about what women can and cannot do. It was every limitation that others tried to place on us. And when it shattered, those assumptions shattered with it. She raised her hand in a final salute. To all the soldiers who served beside me, who taught me, who trusted me with their lives, thank you. To all the candidates I had the honor of training, carry the standard forward. And to all the young women considering this path, know this, the door is open, we opened it, now walk through it. The crowd rose to their feet in applause. Sarah Mitchell walked off the stage and into retirement, her legacy secured. She had done what everyone said could not be done. She had excelled where others expected her to fail. She had shattered targets and expectations in equal measure. And somewhere, in training compounds and combat zones around the world, women wearing crossed rifles were proving every day that she had been just the beginning. The shot she took in front of General Prescott had traveled 1,800 meters. But its impact was still being felt, generations later, and would continue to be felt for as long as rifles were shouldered and targets were engaged. Some shots, after all, never stop flying.